I traded shifts just to bring home dinner, thinking a surprise might finally make them smile. Instead, I walked into a quiet kitchen and heard my father say he wished they had stopped at one child. He did not sound angry, just relieved. Standing there with a grocery bag cutting into my fingers, I realized I was merely a glitch in their perfect life. So I decided to grant their wish and vanish completely. My name is Jasira Oakmere, and I am 34 years old. Though standing on the back porch of my parents' house that Tuesday evening, I felt stripped of every year of adulthood I had fought to earn. I had traded shifts at Marrowline Field Services specifically to be there at that hour. It was a tactical decision, calculated with the desperation of someone who still believed that effort could be converted into affection if the exchange rate was right. I had left work at 3 in the afternoon, forfeiting 4 hours of overtime pay just to beat the rush hour traffic out of the city and make a detour to that expensive deli on the east side of Briar Hollow, the one where they sell cheese that costs $20 a wedge and crackers that taste like cardboard but signal sophistication. I was not supposed to be home yet. My schedule, which hung on the magnetic board by the refrigerator next to the perfectly curated calendar of social events I was rarely invited to, said I would be working until 7, but I wanted to be nice. That was the pathetic, driving force behind the grocery bag digging a red trench into the palm of my hand. I wanted to walk in with dinner, maybe a bottle of the Pinot Noir my mother claimed to tolerate, and perhaps, just for an hour, we would eat like a normal family. I wanted to buy my way into a moment of peace. The driveway was empty when I pulled in, save for my father's sedan. The silence of the suburbs in Ohio has a specific weight to it. It is not peaceful. It is expectant. It is the sound of lawns being judged and blinds being twitched. I parked my car, a 5-year-old compact that looked like a bruised fruit next to the pristine landscaping of the neighborhood, and killed the engine. I remember sitting there for 10 seconds, listening to the engine block tick as it cooled, taking a breath that tasted like stale recirculated air and nerves. I walked to the back door. We always used the back door. The front door was for guests, for people who mattered, for people who did not live in the guest room because their husband's startup had hit a rough patch and drained their savings account to negative numbers. I was the backdoor daughter. The house was quiet. Usually, at this hour, the television in the den would be blaring some 24-hour news cycle, or my mother would be listening to a podcast about gardening or self-improvement. But today, there was no digital noise, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint, settling creaks of a house that cost $750,000. I reached for the handle, turning it slowly to avoid the squeak that always annoyed my father. I stepped into the mudroom. The heavy paper bag of groceries balanced against my hip. The door from the mudroom to the kitchen was ajar. A slice of warm, yellow light spilled onto the tile floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I could smell coffee fresh, strong coffee and something sweeter, like vanilla. They were having a moment, a quiet afternoon coffee break. My instinct was to call out, to announce my arrival with a cheerful, "I brought dinner," to prove my utility. But then I heard my father's voice. It was not raised. It was not angry. That was what made the next 10 seconds lethal. He was speaking in the calm, level tone he used when discussing the weather or the stock market performance of the last quarter. "Sometimes I wish we had just stopped at one," he said. I froze. My boot hovered an inch above the linoleum. My heart did a strange, violent kick against my ribs, then seemed to stop entirely. "One?" my mother asked. There was a clink of ceramic on granite. She was setting down her mug. She did not sound shocked. She sounded like she was considering a menu option. "Yeah," my father continued, a sigh escaping him, the sound of a man stretching his legs after a long flight. "It would have been cleaner, simpler." "Brielle was easier," my mother agreed. Her voice was swift, automatic. It was a sentence she had clearly practiced in the quiet of her own mind 1,000 times. "She just flows. You know, I never have to explain her to anyone. I never have to make excuses for why she is the way she is. She just fits." I stood in the mudroom, the smell of damp coats and expensive detergent filling my nose. The grocery bag was heavy. It contained a roast chicken, 2 sides from the hot bar, and that $20 cheese. The condensation from a bottle of chilled sparkling water was beginning to soak through the paper. I could feel the dampness seeping onto my shirt, cold and sticky. Jasira is just... My father paused, searching for the word. He didn't say bad. He didn't say failure. He said, heavy. She brings this heaviness into the room, even when she's trying to be helpful. It feels like an obligation, like we're paying a tax. It's the sensitivity, my mother added, and I could hear the smile in her voice, a small, dismissive thing. Everything is a tragedy. Everything is personal. Brielle walks into a room and the lights go up. Jasira walks in and you feel like you need to check the thermostat. And then, they laughed. It wasn't a cruel, villainous cackle. It wasn't the laughter of people plotting a murder. It was the laughter of relief. It was the sound two people make when they finally admit a shared burden they have been carrying for 34 years. It was comfortable. It was genuine. They were bonding over the mutual exhaustion of being my parents. The paper handle of the grocery bag snapped in my grip. I caught the bag before it hit the floor, hugging it to my chest with both arms. The rotisserie chicken was warm against my stomach, a grotesque parody of a hug. The cold water bottle pressed against my ribs. I felt the blood draining from my face, pooling somewhere in my feet, making me feel heavy. Anchored to the spot, I was the tax. I was the heaviness. I was the regret. Speaking of Brielle, my father said, pivoting the conversation so smoothly it gave me whiplash. Did she confirm for the fundraiser I want her at the main table? Of course she did, my mother replied, her voice brightening, shedding the momentary annoyance of discussing me. She's wearing that blue silk thing. We need to make sure the photographer gets a shot of her with the senator. It's good for her portfolio. She's the face we want forward. And the other seat? Oh, just put Edgar there, my mother said. He presents well. He knows how to hold a drink and nod. We can put Jasira at the overflow table near the kitchen. Tell her it's to help with the guests. She likes to feel useful. Perfect, my father said. That solves that. I stopped breathing. They had just dissected my existence, labeled me a regret, praised my sister as the only valid offspring, and then assigned me a seat by the kitchen door at their gala, all in the span of 60 seconds. And they had done it while drinking coffee I had bought them a week ago. The realization hit me not like a wave, but like a physical blow to the sternum. I was not a daughter to them. I was a structural defect in the architecture of their lives. I was a cracked tile they had put a rug over. They didn't hate me. That would have required passion. They simply wished I had never happened. They were tolerating me until I could be removed without social embarrassment. My hands were shaking. The bag was sliding. The damp spot on the paper was tearing. I could have walked in there. I could have thrown the $20 cheese on the counter and screamed. I could have cried and asked them why I wasn't enough, why my straight A's, my clean record, my constant attempts to fix things, my job that paid the bills even if it wasn't glamorous. Why none of it mattered. But as I looked at that slice of yellow light, I realized something terrifyingly clear: they would not care if I walked in crying. I would just be proving their point. I would be the heavy one. I would be the sensitive one. I would be the problem they had to manage. I slowly lowered the bag. I bent my knees, moving with the agonizing slowness of a bomb disposal technician. I set the grocery bag down on the mat in the mudroom. It made a soft crinkle, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. The roast chicken sat there, smelling of rosemary and lemon. The sparkling water sat there, sweating. It was a pathetic offering. It looked like trash waiting to be taken out. I stood up. My hands felt empty and light. I looked at the door one last time. Through the crack, I saw my mother's hand reach out and touch my father's arm, a gesture of affection, a gesture of a team that had successfully navigated a problem. I turned around. I did not slam the door. I turned the handle with the same excruciating care I had used to enter. I stepped out into the cool Ohio evening. The air hit my face, drying the sweat that had broken out on my forehead. The sun was beginning to set. casting long, bruised shadows across the manicured lawn. I walked to my car. My boots crunched on the gravel, but the sound was swallowed by the distance. I didn't run. Running implies panic. I wasn't panicked. I was hollowed out. It felt like someone had reached inside me with a scoop and removed my entire nervous system, leaving only a cold, vibrating shell. I got into the driver's seat and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the loudest thing I had heard all day. I stared at the dashboard. My phone, mounted on the vent, lit up. A notification bubble appeared. It was from Edgar. Late tonight. Don't wait up. 5 words. No emoji. No love you. No explanation. Just a command and a dismissal. I looked at the text, and for the first time, I saw the symmetry of it. Edgar didn't come home because he didn't want to. My parents didn't want me home because I was a burden. I was the common denominator in an equation that resulted in 0. Edgar wasn't working late. He was just avoiding the heaviness. He was likely at a bar or at the gym, or anywhere that wasn't a room containing his wife. I tapped the screen, but I didn't reply. The groceries were still inside the mudroom. The chicken would go cold. The cheese would sweat. My mother would find it in an hour or 2. She would probably be annoyed that I hadn't put it away. She would say, "Jasira left a mess again." She wouldn't ask where I was. She would just assume I was being difficult. I put the car in reverse. I didn't turn on my headlights until I was at the end of the street. I didn't want to shine a light on the house. I wanted it to disappear in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the twilight. I drove toward the highway, not toward the city, but away from it. The road stretched out in front of me, gray and indifferent. I had intended to go home, but I realized, as I merged onto the interstate doing 65 miles per hour, that I didn't have one. I had a mailing address. I had a place where I slept. But a home. A home is where people don't wish you were never born. I drove until the fuel light came on. And then I drove 10 miles more. I did not leave because I was a freeloader. That is the narrative they will likely spin when the neighbors ask where the dark-haired daughter went. They will sip their iced tea and lower their voices and say that Jasira just could not handle the real world, that she came crawling back to the nest and then threw a tantrum when asked to contribute. It is a clean, convenient lie. It fits the shape of the hole I left behind. But the ledger in my head, and the literal ledger I kept in the top drawer of the guest room dresser, tells a different story. I paid rent, on the 1st of every month. I wrote a check for $800. I bought the groceries, not just the basics, but the premium brands my mother preferred. The organic produce that cost 40% more than the regular kind. The imported coffee beans. I paid a third of the utility bills, even though Edgar and I were rarely there during peak hours. I was not a child returning home. I was a tenant who happened to share DNA with the landlords. We were there because of Edgar. It was his logic, his spreadsheet, his 5-year plan. We had taken a hit the previous year, a bad investment combined with a medical deductible that turned out to be astronomical, and our savings had looked anemic. Edgar had sat me down, his face illuminated by the blue light of his laptop, and showed me the math. If we gave up our apartment, if we moved into my parents' 4-bedroom house in Briar Hollow for 6 months, we could stockpile enough cash for a down payment on a place in the Rolling Hills district. "It is just 6 months, Jess," he had said. "Your parents have the space. They are always saying they want to see more of us." That was the first lie. They did not want to see more of us. They wanted to see the idea of us. They wanted the visual of a full Thanksgiving table. They wanted the social credit of being the benevolent patriarch and matriarch, helping the next generation. They did not want the reality of my toothbrush in the bathroom or my car in the driveway. When we moved in, there was no written contract, but the terms of the lease were etched into the air pressure of the house. The rule was simple: be grateful, be silent, and do not take up emotional space. I tried to be the perfect roommate. I was a ghost who cleaned. I wiped down the counters after I made coffee. I never left my shoes by the door. I fixed the loose hinge on the pantry cupboard that had been driving my father crazy for 3 years. I reorganized the linen closet. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week. And what did I get for it? I got the feeling that I was a background extra in a movie starring my sister, Brielle. Brielle did not live there, but her presence was painted onto the walls. Brielle was 29, 5 years younger than me, and she vibrated at a frequency that my parents found intoxicating. She was a marketing consultant, a job title that seemed to involve a lot of long lunches and trips to Cabo. When Brielle came over on Sundays, the house woke up. My mother would hum. My father would open the good wine. I remember a dinner 2 weeks after we moved in. I had spent 3 hours making a beef bourguignon, a recipe that required patience and expensive red wine. The house smelled rich and savory. I had set the table. Brielle breezed in 40 minutes late, holding a box of store-bought macarons. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, not looking sorry at all. Traffic was a nightmare, and I just had to stop at this new patisserie downtown. "Look how cute these are." My mother clapped her hands together. "Oh, Brielle, you shouldn't have. These are gorgeous. Look at that lavender color. You have such an eye for these things." The beef bourguignon sat in the center of the table, steaming, ignored. When we finally sat down, my father took a bite of the stew, chewed thoughtfully, and said, "It is a bit rich. Isn't it heavy on the salt?" "I think it is delicious," Edgar said, but he said it quietly, staring at his plate, the way a hostage speaks to avoid agitating the captors. "Brielle, tell us about the campaign," my mother said, turning her back to me, and that was the dynamic. Brielle could bring a box of cookies and be hailed as a conquering hero. I could cook a 3-course meal and be critiqued on my seasoning. Brielle was the sun. I was the planet that had wandered too close and was getting burned. The labels they put on me were heavy, sticky things. Sensitive, difficult, intense. If I pointed out that my father had forgotten my birthday, I was being oversensitive. If I asked my mother not to rearrange my drawers without asking, I was being territorial. If I tried to talk about the stress of my job, which involved managing logistics for a tri-state shipping fleet, a high-pressure environment that required actual skill, they would glaze over. "You always make everything sound so dramatic." "Jasira," my mother would sigh. "Why can't you just roll with things like your sister Brielle never lets work get to her?" That was because Brielle's work involved choosing font colors, while mine involved ensuring tons of freight did not disappear in a snowstorm, but explaining that only reinforced their diagnosis. Jasira is difficult. Jasira thinks she is smarter than everyone else. And then there was Edgar. My husband was supposed to be my ally. We were supposed to be a united front behind enemy lines. But Edgar had a survival instinct that I lacked. He realized early on that the way to survive in the Oakmere house was to be blandly pleasant and practically invisible. He became a piece of furniture they liked. He watched golf with my father. He complimented my mother's garden. He nodded at the right times. They treated him with a polite, detached courtesy. He was the son-in-law. He was useful. He had a good job. He didn't cause scenes, but he didn't defend me. "Just let it go, Jess," he would whisper in the dark of the guest room. After I had spent an hour fuming about some passive-aggressive comment my mother had made about my weight or my career choice. "They are old. They don't mean it. We just need to get through 3 more months." "They do mean it," I would hiss back. "They treat me like I am a disappointment they are trying to hide." "You are overthinking it," he would say, turning over and pulling the duvet up. "You are tired. Go to sleep." Overthinking it. That phrase was the final nail in the coffin of my sanity. It was the gaslighting mantra of the household. But I wasn't overthinking the bank statements. It started about 6 weeks into our stay. I was diligent about my mail. I had most things digital. But there were certain financial documents, portfolio summaries from an old account, credit line offers that still came via post. I had set up a designated spot on the entryway console for my mail. One Tuesday, I came home and found a letter from my bank sitting on the kitchen island. It had been opened. It wasn't torn open like an animal had gotten to it. It was slit cleanly along the top, likely with the silver letter opener my father kept in his study. I stood there, holding the envelope, feeling a cold prickle of violation on the back of my neck. "Mom," I called out. She was in the living room. Folding laundry. Yes. Why is my bank statement open? She didn't even look up. Oh, is it? I must have opened it by mistake. I was going through a stack of bills. I didn't realize it was yours until I saw the name. It says Jassira Oakmere Fairmere right on the front, I said, trying to keep my voice level. And it was in a separate pile. Honest mistake, Jassira, she snapped, finally looking at me with a look of irritated martyrdom. Don't make a federal case out of it. I didn't read it. I have no interest in your finances. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe it was just clumsy aging eyes. But then it happened again. 3 weeks later, I found a credit card pre-approval letter in the recycling bin. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't even seen it arrive. It had been intercepted, opened, and discarded before I even walked through the door. When I confronted my father about it, he laughed. We are just trying to keep the house tidy. Jassira, junk mail is junk mail. We were doing you a favor. It's my mail, I said. You cannot throw away my mail. You are living under my roof, he said, his voice dropping that octave that signaled the end of the discussion. Don't be petty. Petty? Another label. I started to feel crazy. I started to wonder if I was imagining things. Maybe I had thrown it away and forgotten. Maybe the envelope had arrived unsealed. The environment of the house was designed to make me question my own reality. If 3 people tell you the sky is green, and you are the only one saying it is blue, you eventually stop looking up. But the worst part was the feeling of being a glitch. That was the only word for it. There were moments when I would walk into a room, and the conversation would stop. Not abruptly, but gradually, like a wind-up toy running out of battery. My parents would smile tight, polite smiles, the kind you give to a stranger in an elevator. They would ask generic questions. How was work? Traffic okay? They never asked how I was. They never asked what I was thinking, or what I was reading, or what I was dreaming about. They only engaged with the functional parts of me. The part that paid rent, the part that drove the car, the part that took out the trash. The emotional part of me, that was the glitch. That was the error code. I remember one evening, about a month before I left, I had received a commendation at work. I had saved the company $50,000 by rerouting a shipment through a secondary hub during a labor strike. It was a big win. I was proud. I came home, buzzing with the need to share it. Edgar wasn't home yet. My parents were in the den, watching a game show. I had a great day, I said, standing in the doorway. My father didn't take his eyes off the screen. That is nice. I saved the account, I pressed on, needing them to look at me. My boss said it was the best logistical save he has seen in 5 years. My mother turned her head. She looked at me, really looked at me, for a second, and in her eyes, I didn't see pride. I saw exhaustion. That is good. Jassira, she said. Did you remember to move your car? The landscapers are coming tomorrow morning. The air left my lungs. Yes, I said. I moved the car. Good, she said, and turned back to the TV. Brielle called earlier. She is thinking of getting a puppy. Can you imagine a puppy in that apartment? They launched into a 10-minute discussion about the hypothetical puppy of the golden child. My career victory dissolved into the carpet. Unseen and unheard, I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, and stared at the wall. I realized then that I could win a Nobel Prize, and they would ask me if I had remembered to take the recycling out. It wasn't that they were villains in a fairy tale. They didn't beat me. They didn't starve me. They just erased me. They had decided long ago who I was, and no amount of evidence to the contrary would change their minds. I was the difficult one, the heavy one, the mistake. I tried to tell Edgar about the mail again that night. I think they are looking at my financial info, I said. He sighed, the sound of a man dealing with a tiresome child. Jess, why would they do that? They have plenty of money. They are just nosy old people. Stop looking for conspiracies. It feels weird. Edgar, it feels like they are checking up on me. You are stressed, he said, repeating the mantra. You are working too hard. Just relax. We are almost out of here. I swallowed the fear. I told myself he was right. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that my parents loved me in their own broken, quiet way. I held on to that delusion with a desperate, white-knuckled grip. I held on to it right up until the moment I stood in the mudroom with a bag of groceries cutting into my hand, and heard my father say the words that shattered the mirror. Sometimes I wish we had just stopped at one. It wasn't a sudden snap. It was the final crack in a foundation that had been rotting for 34 years. The mail, the insults, the silence, the preference for Brielle, it all made sense in that instant. They didn't hate me. They had made it clear they wished I would simply fade out of the picture. And as I drove along the highway, the mile markers dissolving into streaks of light, it hit me that for the first time I was ready to give them exactly that. Not my life, but my presence. I was done being available. What they failed to understand was who they were dealing with. They labeled me too sensitive, too fragile. They mistook my quiet for compliance. What they never saw was that years of being overlooked had trained me to operate independently. The daughter they called difficult was also the one who handled logistics for a living. I knew how to plan, I knew how to organize, and I knew how to leave situations cleanly and on my own terms. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket, feeling the prepaid debit card I'd picked up at a drugstore a few towns back, something I'd called an emergency option at the time. Now it was simply a tool, a way to stand on my own without explanations. This wasn't running away. It was a course correction. I glanced at the rearview mirror one last time. The road behind me was empty. No one was chasing me, and for the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone either. No one was looking. Perfect. The blue dot on my dashboard navigation screen was the first thing that had to die. I was 20 miles outside of Briar Hollow, merging onto the interstate that cut through the darkened heart of Ohio. When I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, the trucks rattled past, shaking the frame of my compact sedan, their headlights cutting harsh, strobing intervals into the cabin. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the settings menu. For 3 years, Edgar and I had shared our locations. It was a safety measure, he had said, a convenience. Now, looking at that pulsing beacon, it looked like a shackle. I tapped the screen. Stop sharing location. The phone asked me to confirm. Are you sure? I pressed yes. The dot vanished. The tether snapped. In the digital world, I was now a ghost. I did not feel liberated yet. I felt cold. I felt the precise, adrenaline-fueled clarity of a person defusing a bomb. Panic was a luxury for people who had a safety net. I had none. I had to build my own, and I had to do it with the materials I had in my pockets. I drove another 10 miles to a 24-hour truck stop, the kind with fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects and the smell of diesel and old grease hanging heavy in the air. I walked inside, keeping my head down, pulling my scarf up over my chin. I bought a prepaid SIM card and a cheap burner phone, a plastic brick that felt like a toy compared to the sleek smartphone I had left in the car. I paid in cash, $40. I went back to the car and took out my primary phone. I did not destroy it. That would be too dramatic. And drama leaves a trail. Instead, I powered it down, removed the SIM card, and snapped the little chip in half. I dropped the pieces into a soda can I fished out of a trash bin. The phone itself I shoved deep into the glove compartment. Let them find it later. Let them wonder why it went dark. My next stop was an ATM at a bank branch 3 towns over, a place where no one knew the Oakmere name. I had a personal savings account, separate from the joint one I shared with Edgar. It was not a fortune. It was my escape fund, though I had never admitted that to myself until now. It had $3,420 in it. I withdrew $500, the daily limit. Then I sat in the car and used the burner phone's slow, clunky browser to transfer the rest of the balance to a new online-only checking account I had researched months ago during a lunch break, just out of idle curiosity. I changed the contact email to a new one I created right there in the front seat, Ren_Hollow_26 at a secure mail service, no family names, no birth years, just a bird and a place that did not exist. Then, I sent the text. I turned the burner phone in my hand. feeling the cheap plastic. I had memorized Edgar's number. I typed it in carefully. I need some quiet for a few days. Don't worry. I stared at the screen. I debated adding, I love you. I debated adding, I am sorry, but I wasn't sorry. And at that moment, sitting in a dark parking lot with the echo of my father's wish ringing in my ears, I wasn't sure if I loved him, either. Or rather, I wasn't sure if the man I loved actually existed, or if he was just another projection of my need to be accepted. I hit send. I did not wait for a reply. I pulled the battery out of the burner phone immediately. I would check it later, on my terms. I drove the car to a long-term park and ride lot near the regional transit hub. It was a massive sea of concrete and steel, filled with commuters' cars. I parked in the back row, under a flickering lamppost. Leaving the car felt like leaving a limb. It was the last physical object that tied me to my life in Briar Hollow. But a car has a license plate. A car has registration. A car is a tracking device on wheels. I walked to the terminal with nothing but my backpack and a gym bag I had kept in the trunk. I had packed it weeks ago with emergency clothes for work, a change of shoes, a sweater, toiletries. Now, it was my entire wardrobe. I bought a ticket at the automated kiosk. Not a plane ticket, airports require too much ID, too many cameras. I bought a bus ticket, Greyhound, destination Canton Harbor, Pennsylvania. Why Canton Harbor? It was not random. Random is dangerous because it has no support system. Canton Harbor was 300 miles away. It was a rusted-out steel town trying to reinvent itself as a tech hub, a place of brick warehouses and cheap lofts, and it was where Tessa Rourke lived. Tessa was the only person from my college years I had kept in touch with, mostly because she was the only one who didn't care about the Oakmere social standing. She was an artist who worked as a paralegal to pay the rent. She was messy, loud, and fiercely loyal. I had called her from the payphone at the truck stop, 5 minutes after I bought the burner. "Tess," I had said, my voice shaking for the first time. "I am coming." She hadn't asked, "Why?" or "Is everything okay?" or "Did you leave Edgar?" She had heard the vibration in my voice, the frequency of a woman standing on a ledge, and she had simply said, "Key is under the frog statue by the door. Get here first. Breathe first." The bus ride was a blur of motion and darkness. I sat in the back, near the bathroom, pulling my hood up. The bus smelled of sanitizer and stale chips. Beside me, a man slept with his mouth open, snoring softly. Across the aisle, a teenager watched a video on her phone, the blue light illuminating her face. I watched the highway markers flash by. Each mile was a layer of skin being peeled away. I was shedding Jasira the daughter. I was shedding Jasira the wife. I was becoming just a body moving through space. We arrived in Canton Harbor at 4 a.m. The city was asleep, wrapped in a blanket of fog rolling off the river. I took a cab to Tessa's building, a converted warehouse in the indistinct district between the gentrified zone and the old industrial blocks. I found the frog statue a grotesque, chipped ceramic thing and found the key. Entering Tessa's apartment was like stepping into a warm, chaotic cave. It smelled of cheap lavender laundry detergent, old books, and cold coffee. There were canvases stacked against the walls, piles of legal files on the dining table, and a half-eaten pizza on the counter. It was messy. It was cluttered. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Tessa was asleep on the sofa, wrapped in a knitted blanket. She stirred when I clicked the lock, sitting up and blinking against the darkness. "You made it," she croaked, her voice thick with sleep. "I made it," I whispered. She didn't get up to hug me. She knew I was fragile, that if she touched me, I might shatter. She just pointed to the air mattress she had already inflated in the corner. "Sleep. We talk when the sun is up, or whenever you wake up. No rules." I lay down on the mattress. I didn't take off my coat. I stared at the ceiling, where the streetlights from outside cast long, shifting rectangles of orange light. I reached for the burner phone and put the battery back in. I needed to do the final scrub. I accessed my social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I didn't delete them. Deleting them draws attention. Instead, I went into the privacy settings. I locked everything down. I changed my profile pictures to generic landscapes. I turned off suggested friends. I untagged myself from every photo Brielle had ever posted of me, which wasn't many. Then, I changed my phone number on the accounts to the burner number, just to catch any login alerts, and then logged out of all sessions on all devices. It felt like I was walking through a house turning off the lights, room by room. I lay there in the dark, waiting for the tears. I waited for the crushing grief of leaving my marriage, my parents, my home. I waited to mourn the life I had built for 34 years, but the tears did not come. Instead, I felt a vast, echoing emptiness. It wasn't sad, it was clean. It was the feeling of a hard drive that has been formatted. I had been deleted from their contacts. But in doing so, I had deleted them from my expectations. I checked the burner phone one last time before dawn. There were 17 missed calls from Edgar. 17. He had called once every 10 minutes for the first 3 hours. Then there was a gap. Then 3 more calls. Then a text. Jess, where are you? This isn't funny. Jess, your mom is worried. Pick up the phone. I watched the screen, waiting for it to light up again. It was now 6 in the morning. The phone stayed dark. The calls had stopped at exactly 11 at night. I stared at the timestamp of the last call. 11:15. After that, silence. Why did he stop? If his wife was missing, if he was truly panicked, he would have kept calling. He would have called the police. He would have called my friends. But he stopped. And then I realized why. He had talked to them. He had called my parents. He had told them I wasn't home, that I had sent a text saying I needed space, and my father, in his calm, reasonable voice, the voice that treated emotions like inefficiencies, would have said something like, "Oh, let her go, Edgar. She is just having one of her episodes. She wants attention. If you chase her, you just feed the drama. Let her sulk. She will be back when she runs out of money." My mother would have added, "It is just like when she was a teenager, so dramatic. Just leave her be. She needs to cool off." They had called off the search before it even began. They had dismissed my disappearance as a temper tantrum. Edgar had listened to them. He had looked at his phone, looked at the empty bed, and decided that his wife's safety was less important than his in-laws' narrative. He had chosen their version of reality over me, again. I put the phone down on the floorboards. A single, dry sob escaped my throat. It was sharp and painful, like a hiccup. But that was it. That was all they got. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 34 years, I wasn't Jasira the disappointment. I wasn't Jasira the burden. I was just a woman in a room in Pennsylvania, and I had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Okay," I whispered to the dust bunnies under Tessa's sofa. "If I am gone, then let me be gone." I slept, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream about that house. The first month was a blur of gray concrete and fluorescent lighting. I did not live. I simply functioned. My existence had shrunk down to the size of a twin mattress on the floor of Tessa's spare room, and the road of the number 42 bus that took me to the industrial park on the edge of Canton Harbor. I took the jobs that nobody else wanted, the ones where they did not ask for a resume or a background check, just a pulse and a pair of steel-toed boots. I worked for a temp agency called Quick Staff that operated out of a strip mall next to a pawn shop. One week, I was sorting packages in a distribution center that smelled of cardboard dust and diesel fumes. The next, I was doing inventory in a warehouse for a restaurant supply company, counting thousands of white ceramic plates until my eyes crossed. There is a specific kind of invisibility that comes with these jobs. When you are wearing a neon yellow vest and holding a clipboard, you cease to be a person. You become a piece of machinery. People walk past you without making eye contact. Managers bark orders at you without learning your name. To them, I was just temp number 4 or "Hey you," and honestly, I preferred it that way. Being "Hey you" was better than being Jasira, the disappointment. I was sleepwalking. That is the only way to describe it. I would wake up before the sun, drink the bitter, instant coffee Tessa kept in a jar, and go to work. I moved boxes. I scanned barcodes. I swept floors. I came home. I showered to wash the warehouse smell off my skin, but it felt like the grit was under my fingernails, permanent and scratching. My eating habits became purely utilitarian. I ate because my body required fuel to lift boxes, not because I was hungry. I stood over the sink in the dark kitchen, eating cold soup from a can or a slice of toast. Staring at the reflection of the street lamp in the window, it felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life through a windshield that had not been wiped in years. Everything was muffled. Everything was distant. I stopped looking in the mirror. I did not want to see the circles under my eyes or the way my cheekbones were starting to sharpen as I lost weight. I did not want to see the resemblance to my mother in the set of my jaw. Tessa was the only thing tethering me to the earth. She did not coddle me. She did not try to fix me with yoga classes or motivational quotes. She understood that I was in a state of shock, like a burn victim who needs to be kept warm and hydrated but not touched. One Tuesday evening in the second month, she came home and found me sitting on the floor, staring at a pile of unpaid bills I had brought with me, my car insurance, my phone bill for the line I had destroyed. She sat down next to me and placed a yellow legal pad on the floor. "Okay," she said, uncapping a pen. "We are doing a survival budget." She wrote income at the top and outgo at the bottom. "You made $600 last week," she stated, not asking. "Rent is 0 for now because I said so. Food is $200 if we are careful. Transport is $50. She drew lines, calculated totals, and circled a number at the bottom. "You can save $350 a week if you stick to this," she said. "In 3 months, you will have $4,000. That is first and last month's rent on a studio apartment in the East End." She tapped the paper with the pen. It was a rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. "This is the way out, Jess," she said. "Not magic, math. You build a floor, then you stand on it." I looked at the numbers. They were small, pathetic numbers compared to the household budget I used to manage in Briar Hollow. But they were mine. Nobody could take them away. Nobody could say I didn't earn them. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay," she repeated. Then she stood up and went to the fridge. "Now, eat something that isn't soup." But the numbness did not truly crack until the 3rd month. And when it did, it wasn't because of a grand realization or a dramatic event. It was because of a smell. It was a Thursday night. It was raining. A cold, miserable Pennsylvania rain that chilled you to the bone. I had come home early because the warehouse shift ended at 3. I decided to make toast. Just simple toast with peanut butter. I put the bread in Tessa's old toaster oven, the kind with a timer that stuck. I turned around to wash a spoon, and I got distracted by the sound of the rain against the glass. I didn't notice the smoke until the smell hit me. It was the sharp, acrid scent of burnt peanut butter and charred bread, and instantly, I was not in Canton Harbor. I was 6 years old, standing in the kitchen in Briar Hollow. I had tried to make breakfast for my father for Father's Day. I had burned the toast. I remembered the smoke. I remembered him coming into the kitchen, waving his hand in front of his face, coughing. I remembered what he said. He didn't yell. He just looked at the mess, at the blackened bread, and sighed. "Jasira, why do you always have to make things so complicated? We have a perfectly good cereal selection." He hadn't thanked me for trying. He had just cleaned up the mess and poured himself a bowl of flakes, eating in silence while I stood there with tears stinging my eyes. Holding a plate of charcoal, the smell in Tessa's apartment was exactly the same. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, and my knees just gave out. I slid down to the linoleum floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The toaster oven dinged, a cheerful little bell, but I couldn't move. The dam broke. I didn't just cry. I heaved. It was a physical expulsion of 3 months of silence. I cried for the 6-year-old girl who just wanted to make breakfast. I cried for the 34-year-old woman who had driven away in the dark. I cried for the roast chicken I had left in the mudroom. I cried because the smell of burning was the smell of my entire life, an attempt to provide warmth that only resulted in a mess. Tessa came home 10 minutes later. She found me curled up on the kitchen floor, the apartment filled with smoke. She didn't panic. She opened the window. She unplugged the toaster. Then she sat down on the floor next to me, leaning her back against the cabinet. "Talk," she said. It wasn't a request. I wiped my face with my sleeve. My throat felt raw. "They laughed," I said. My voice sounded jagged, like broken glass. Tessa turned her head. "Who laughed?" "My parents," I said. "In the kitchen, that day, before I left." And then I told her everything. I told her about the grocery bag cutting into my hand. I told her about the conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I told her about Brielle being the easy one. I told her about my father wishing they had stopped at one child. I told her about the laughter. "It wasn't mean laughter," I choked out, tears streaming down my face again. "That is the worst part. Tess, it was relieved laughter. They were so happy to just admit that I was the mistake. It was like they were bonding over how much of a burden I am." I looked at Tessa. I expected her to look horrified. I expected her to offer sympathy. But Tessa's face was hard. Her eyes were dark and focused. She looked like a judge passing a sentence. She waited until I stopped shaking. "So," she said, her voice low and even, "they think you are a mistake." "Yes." "And they are happier without you." "Yes." Tessa reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong, calloused from her art. "Then you punish them," she said. I looked at her, startled. "What?" "You don't go back and scream," she said. "You don't go back and beg for an apology you will never get. If they think they are better off without you, then you make that true. You disappear so completely that they start to wonder if you were ever there at all. And then, when you have built something that is yours, entirely yours, you let them see it, but you never let them touch it." She looked me dead in the eye. "You live like a person they never had. You become someone they can't claim." It was a dangerous sentence. It was a sentence that cut the last chord. You live like a person they never had. I took a deep breath. The smell of burnt toast was still in the air, but it didn't make me want to cry anymore. It made me want to open a window and clear the room. The next day, I started the list. I bought a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "Evidence of Jessera." I needed to prove to myself that I existed outside of their narrative. I needed to prove that I wasn't just a heavy presence or a glitch. I wrote down everything I had ever done that they had ignored. Item 1, managed logistics for a fleet of 50 trucks during a blizzard. 0 late deliveries. Item 2, restored the antique vanity in the guest room, the one Mom said was trash, until I fixed it. Item 3, negotiated the contract for the warehouse lease at my old job. Item 4, can identify 3 distinct types of wood grain by touch. I dug through my old digital files, the ones backed up on the cloud. I printed out old performance reviews from work. Exceptional attention to detail. Highly reliable. Crisis manager. I taped them into the notebook. This was my dossier. This was my proof of life. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into 3 full months, a cold, hard realization settled in my stomach like a stone. My phone, the burner phone, was silent. I had kept the number private, yes, but I had expected something. I had expected Edgar to reach out to Tessa. He knew we were friends in college. If he really wanted to find me, if he was truly desperate, he would have called every person I had ever known. He would have hired a private investigator, but Tessa said nothing. No one had called her. And my parents. I checked my email, the old one. The one I had left logged in on a library computer just to see. There were emails from newsletters. There were spam messages. There was a notification about a sale at a shoe store. There was nothing from my mother. Not a, "Where are you?" Not a, "Please come home." Not even an angry, "You are being selfish." There was just silence. It was as if I had walked out the door and the water had closed over my head. leaving no ripple. They weren't looking for me. They weren't worried. They were probably telling people I was on a sabbatical or finding myself. They were managing the PR of my absence, not the reality of it. Edgar hadn't fought for me. My parents hadn't missed me. I sat in the library, staring at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. For 34 years, I had thought that if I just tried hard enough, if I was good enough, they would love me. I thought my absence would be a punishment, a hole they would feel, but it wasn't a hole, it was a relief. I logged out of the email account, I closed the browser, I walked out of the library into the bright, cold sunlight of Canton Harbor. I took a deep breath of the air that smelled of river water and coffee. I wasn't going back, not to be their daughter, not to be Edgar's wife. Those roles were dead. They died in the kitchen with the laughter. I would go back one day, yes, but not to rejoin them. I would go back to close the account. I would go back to balance the ledger. I walked down the street, my boots clicking on the pavement. I had $4,000 in the bank. I had a notebook full of evidence that I was competent, and I had a plan forming in the back of my mind, sharp and cold as a blade. If they wanted a stranger, I would become the most formidable stranger they had ever met. It was exactly 3 months to the day since I had walked out the back door of the house in Briar Hollow. 90 days, 2,160 hours. I was sitting in a corner booth of a diner in Canton Harbor, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and looking at the rain streak against the window. My phone buzzed on the Formica table. It was not a text. It was an email notification. I glanced at the screen, expecting a job alert from the temp agency or a spam message about car insurance. The subject line made my blood run cold. Oakmere Family Summer Plans. August Getaway. It was from my mother, and it was carbon copied to everyone, my father, Brielle, and Edgar. My hand hovered over the phone. For a second, a foolish, childish part of my brain thought, this is it. This is where they ask where I am. This is where they beg me to come home. I opened the email. There was no begging. There was no inquiry into my well-being. There was no acknowledgement that I had been missing for a quarter of a year. The body of the email read, "Hi everyone, I am finalizing the booking for the lake house. Attached is the Google Sheet for food assignments and room allocations. Please fill in your preferences by Friday so I can put the deposit down." And then, at the very bottom, almost as an afterthought, a single line addressed to me, Jasira. "If you are around, please confirm early so we can get the head count right for the caterer. If not, we will just count you as a tentative. If I am around." I stared at the words until they blurred. If I am around, as if I were a neighbor who might be out of town for the weekend. As if I were a distant cousin who occasionally flaked on reunions. Not a daughter who had vanished into thin air leaving behind a husband and a life. They had not filed a missing persons report. They had not called the hospitals. They had simply categorized my absence as a social inconvenience, something to be managed with a spreadsheet. I clicked the link to the Google Sheet. It opened with a cheerful green header. The organization was military grade. My mother's organizational skills were always impeccable, even when she was erasing her own child. I scrolled down the rows. Row 4, Brielle Oakmere, Role Wine Selection Aesthetic Direction. Of course, Brielle was in charge of the vibe, Row 5 Parents, Role Venue Coordination Payment, Row 6 Edgar Fairmere, Role Family Representative/Transport Logistics. I stopped breathing. Edgar was going, and he wasn't just going. He had a title. Family Representative. He had taken my spot. No, he hadn't just taken it. He had been promoted. In my absence. He wasn't the grieving husband wondering where his wife was. He was the dutiful son-in-law, stepping up to fill the void, driving the car, carrying the cooler, nodding at my father's jokes. He had integrated himself seamlessly into the unit that had rejected me. I scrolled to the bottom. Row 10 Jasira, no role, no assignment, just a blank cell under dietary restrictions and a note in the status column that read, TBD, to be determined. I sat there in the diner, surrounded by the smell of frying bacon and old coffee, and I felt something inside me snap. But it wasn't the snap of a bone breaking, it was the snap of a lock clicking into place. For 3 months, I had been living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had been waiting for them to realize I was gone. I had been waiting for the guilt to hit them. But there was no guilt. There was only convenience. My absence made the seating chart easier. My absence meant they didn't have to deal with the heavy daughter. My absence meant Edgar could be the son they always wanted without the baggage of the wife they didn't like. I didn't reply. I didn't type out a furious email screaming I am alive. You monsters. I didn't hit delete. I closed the tab. I wasn't going to block them. I wasn't going to disappear from their digital radar. I was going to watch. If they wanted to treat me like a variable in a spreadsheet, I would become the error in their formula, but the universe, or perhaps the perverse nature of my family, wasn't done with me that week. 2 days later, I received another notification. This one wasn't from my mother. It was from a bank one where I held a credit card I hadn't used in 2 years. I had kept the account open only because closing it would hurt my credit score. But the physical card was long gone. Shredded in a move years ago, the email subject was action required regarding your request for a credit limit increase. I frowned. I hadn't requested a limit increase. I was living on cash and a debit card from a local credit union in Canton Harbor. I hadn't logged into that bank account in months. I opened the email. Dear Jasira, we are reviewing your request to increase the limit on your Platinum Rewards card to $25,000. To finalize this, please provide the additional income verification documents requested. My hands started to shake, but not from fear, from a cold, dawning suspicion. I logged into the banking portal. I had to reset my password because the old one didn't work. That should have been the first red flag. When I finally got in, I went straight to the activity log. The card wasn't dormant. There were charges, recent ones, $500 at a luxury spa in Briar Hollow, $200 at a steakhouse, $1,200 at a boutique furniture store. I looked at the dates. They started 3 weeks after I left. Someone had ordered a replacement card. Someone had activated it. And someone was using it. I knew who it was. I didn't need a detective. I knew the spending habits. The spa was where Brielle went for her monthly facials. The steakhouse was my father's favorite. They weren't just erasing me emotionally. They were cannibalizing me financially. I printed the statement. The pages felt hot in my hands. I went straight to Tessa's office. She worked as a paralegal for a small firm that handled everything from divorces to property disputes. She took one look at my face and closed the door. What is it? She asked. I slammed the papers down on her desk. They are stealing from me. Tessa picked up the statement. She scanned the lines, her eyes narrowing. This is the platinum card. The one you said was zero balance. It was zero balance, I said. Until they decided that since I wasn't using my life, they might as well use my credit. This is fraud, Jess, Tessa said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, professional tone. This is identity theft. Who has access to your mail? They do, I said. The billing address. Look at it. She looked. 14 Maple Drive, Briar Hollow, Ohio. They redirected the card to their house, I said. Or maybe I never changed it because I never used it, but they opened the replacement. They signed for it. They are using it. Tessa stood up. You need to see Mark, now. Mark was an advisor who worked with the firm. He was a forensic accountant who usually dealt with hiding assets in divorces, but he knew the credit system inside and out. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a leather chair across from a man who looked like he slept in his suit. Mark listened to me, looked at the statement, and then leaned back. This is the tip of the iceberg, he said. If they are bold enough to use an existing card, they might be bold enough to open new ones. Family fraud is common. Jasira, they rationalize it. They tell themselves, oh, she is gone. She won't mind. We are just borrowing it. We will pay it back. But they never pay it back. He pushed a notepad toward me. We need to pull your full Tri-Bureau credit report, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. We need to see everything attached to your social security number. I spent the next hour typing my information into a secure terminal. My fingers felt heavy. I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid that my entire existence had been reduced to a resource for the people who wished I had never been born. The report generated. It was a PDF file, 20 pages long. Mark opened it on the big screen. I gasped. It wasn't just the platinum card. There were 3 new inquiries in the last 60 days. Inquiry 1. A loan application for home improvement. Status pending. Inquiry 2. A new store credit card for a high-end electronics retailer. Status approved. Balance, $4,000. Inquiry 3. A joint checking account application. Mark scrolled down to the address history. Current address reported by creditors, 14 Maple Drive, Briar Hollow. Who is the co-applicant on the loan? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark clicked on the detail view. Co-applicant Edgar Fairmere. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Edgar, my husband, the man who texted me, "Don't wait up." He wasn't just passive. He was active. He was using my credit score, which was excellent, because I was the responsible one, the one who paid bills on time to secure a loan for home improvements on a house I didn't own. They are renovating, I said, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. They are renovating the house using my credit, probably the guest room, probably the room I slept in. Mark looked at me with pity, but I didn't want pity. I wanted a weapon. Is this illegal? I asked. Highly, Mark said. It is federal wire fraud. It is identity theft. It is grand larceny depending on the amount. If you report this, the police will get involved. It is a felony. I looked at the screen. I looked at the names. Edgar Fairmere, the Oakmeres. They thought I was a ghost. They thought I was a harmless, invisible entity that they could harvest for parts. They thought I would never check. They thought I was too sensitive, too emotional to understand the hard mechanics of finance. They were wrong. I don't want to call the police yet, I said. Mark raised an eyebrow. Why they are burying you in debt? Because if I call the police now, they will claim it was a misunderstanding, I said. They will say I gave them permission verbal. They will say they were just managing my affairs while I was away. They will charm their way out of it. My father knows the judge in that county. My mother knows the sheriff. I stood up. The cold clarity from the diner had crystallized into something harder. It was diamond hard now. I need to let them dig the hole deeper, I said. I need undeniable proof. I need signatures. I need IP addresses. I need to know exactly who clicked submit on those applications. Mark nodded slowly. A smile touched his lips. I can get the IP addresses. We can file a dispute that triggers an internal investigation without alerting them immediately. We can trap them. Do it, I said. I walked out of the office into the gray afternoon. The email about the summer trip was still in my inbox. If you are around, oh, I was around. I was more around than they could possibly imagine. I took out my burner phone and opened the banking app for my secret account, the one they didn't know about. The one with my warehouse wages in it. I had $4,000. It wasn't enough to fight a war, but it was enough to start a business. I was done being the victim. I was done being the daughter. They wanted to play games with numbers. Fine. I was good at numbers. I was going to build something they couldn't steal, and then I was going to use it to dismantle the house of cards they were building on my name. I turned the corner and walked toward the hardware store. I had an idea. It involved wood and varnish, and the kind of meticulous, silent work that my family thought was beneath them. It was time to build Wren Hollow. I traded the barcode scanner for a block of 80 grit sandpaper. And that was when I finally stopped feeling like a ghost and started feeling like a mechanic. The transition wasn't glamorous. It didn't happen in a montage with upbeat music. It happened on a Tuesday evening in Tessa's living room, with a drop cloth spread over her rug and a beat-up, water-stained nightstand I had found on the curb 3 blocks away. It was trash. To anyone else, it was firewood. The veneer was peeling. One leg was wobbly. and someone had let a cold drink sweat a white ring right into the center of the top surface. But I looked at it, and I didn't see trash. I saw neglect. I saw something that had been useful, then ignored, then discarded because it required a little bit of effort to maintain. I saw myself. I spent 3 nights on that nightstand. I stripped the finish, choking on the chemical smell of varnish remover, but enjoying the burn of it because it felt like I was scrubbing away the past. I glued the leg. I sanded the top down until the white ring, the scar of someone's carelessness, was gone, revealing the clean, raw oak underneath. When I applied the new stain, a deep, rich walnut color, the wood drank it in like a dying man drinking water. When I was done, it didn't look new. It looked better than new. It looked like it had a story. Tessa came home, looked at the nightstand, and then looked at me. "You can sell that," she said. "It is just a nightstand," I said, wiping sawdust from my forehead. "No," she said. "It is a resurrection. Put it online." I listed it on a local marketplace app. I didn't use my name. I used a handle I had come up with during a sleepless night, wren and hollow. The wren was for the small, brown bird that nobody notices but sings louder than anything in the forest. The hollow was for the space inside me, and a reclaiming of the briar hollow that had spit me out. I sold the nightstand for $80 in 3 hours. The buyer, a young student, sent me a message. "I love it. It feels real." That $80 went straight into buying a better sander. Wren and Hollow Restorations was born not out of ambition, but out of a desperate need to control something. I couldn't control my family. I couldn't control the fact that my husband was renovating my parents' house with my credit, but I could control a piece of wood. I could control the joinery. I could control the finish. I started taking commissions. Small things at first: a wobbly kitchen chair, a spice rack that needed refinishing. Then, a coffee table. I created a simple website. I didn't put my face on it. I just posted photos of the before and after, and I wrote. I didn't write marketing copy. I wrote the truth, thinly veiled as product descriptions. Under the photo of a cracked mirror frame I had repaired, I wrote, "Sometimes the damage isn't the end of the object's life. It is just evidence that it survived. We don't hide the cracks. We stabilize them. We make them part of the history." Under a photo of a mid-century desk that had been painted over with cheap white latex, I wrote, "Stripping away the layers that other people forced onto this piece to make it fit in." Underneath the cheap paint, the original character was waiting. It just needed permission to breathe. People connected with it. I started getting emails not just asking for quotes, but sharing stories. "I have my grandmother's chest, and I hope you can help." One woman wrote, "It is falling apart, but I can't throw it away." "Can you save it?" "Yes," I replied. "I can save it." By the 4th month, Tessa's living room was too small. I was waking up with sawdust in my sheets. I took a risk. I used $2,000 of my savings, half of my escape fund, to rent a corner in a shared makerspace in the old industrial district of Canton Harbor. It was called the Foundry. It was a cavernous brick building filled with metalworkers, sculptors, and carpenters. It was loud. It smelled of ozone and sawdust and sweat. It was the furthest thing from the sterile, silent, passive-aggressive atmosphere of Briar Hollow. I bought a table saw. I bought a set of Japanese chisels that cost more than my first car payment. And I bought a branding iron. It was a custom design, a small circle, about the size of a quarter, with a stylized wren silhouette perched on a branch. Every piece I finished, I turned over. I heated the iron with a torch until it glowed angry red. Then I pressed it into the hidden wood on the underside or the back. Hiss, a puff of smoke, the smell of burning wood. It was my signature. It was my way of saying I was here. I did this. You cannot erase this. But while I was building Wren and Hollow in the daylight, I was digging a grave in the dark. Mark, the forensic accountant, had become my second closest contact after Tessa. We met once a week at a coffee shop that had no Wi-Fi. A precaution Mark insisted on. He called it digital hygiene. The investigation into the credit fraud was yielding results. But they were not just numbers. They were betrayals, categorized and time-stamped. We have tracked the IP addresses for the new credit card applications, Mark said one rainy afternoon in late May. He slid a folder across the table. It is confirmed. They all originate from the residential IP assigned to your parents' address, specifically the MAC address associated with a desktop computer in the study. My father's computer, I said, staring at the paper. He never lets anyone else use it. And here's the kicker, Mark said. He tapped a specific line on the report. To open that second store card, the one for the electronics store, they needed email verification. They didn't use your primary email, the one you likely have on your phone. They used an old secondary account, jessoak88@providers.net. I froze. I haven't used that email in 5 years. It was my junk account for online shopping when I lived at home before I got married. Well, Mark said, leaning in. Someone used it, and we can see that the password for that email account was changed. When? I asked. January 10th, Mark said. The date hung in the air between us. January 10th. I did the math in my head. That was 3 weeks before I left. That was the week Edgar and I moved in. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. They changed the password while I was living there, I whispered. While I was cooking dinner, while I was scrubbing their floors. Correct, Mark said. It wasn't an opportunistic crime, Jasira. They didn't just see you leave and decide to raid your accounts. They were preparing the ground while you were sleeping under their roof. They locked you out of your own backup verification method so that if they opened accounts in your name, you wouldn't get the alerts. I leaned back in the chair. Feeling the blood drain from my face, it reframed everything. The conversation I had overheard in the kitchen. I wish we had stopped at one wasn't just an emotional confession. It was a justification. If I didn't exist as a person, if I was just a mistake, then my assets, my credit, my identity, it all belonged to the real family. They saw me as a resource to be harvested. They stole my identity while looking me in the eye, I said. And Edgar, I asked, though I already knew the answer. The loan application for the renovation has his digital signature, Mark said. But the email address used for the loan correspondence, that same hacked Jessoak88 account. He is in on it. Or at least, he is using the access they gave him. I looked out the window. The rain was washing the soot off the brick buildings of Canton Harbor. I realized then that my revenge couldn't just be about success. It couldn't just be about living well is the best revenge. That was a platitude for people whose families merely annoyed them. This was criminal. This was predation. What is the total damage? I asked. Right now. About $35,000 in unauthorized debt, Mark said. And growing. They just put a deposit down on a venue rental using the Platinum card. A big one. The gala, I said. The Fairmere and Oakmere Community Gala. That fits the timeline, Mark said. The deposit was $5,000. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. They were using my credit to pay for the party, where they would celebrate their status, a status built on excluding me. Jess, Mark said, his voice serious. We have enough to go to the police right now. We can have them arrested. We can freeze everything. I looked at my hands. They were rougher now. There was a small cut on my thumb from a chisel slip. There was wood stain under my fingernails. They were the hands of someone who built things. No, I said. Mark blinked. No, Jess. They are bleeding you dry. If I go to the police now, I said, it becomes a messy family dispute. They will cry. They will say I am unstable. They will say I told them to use the cards. It will be my word against 3 respectable pillars of the Briar Hollow community. The police there play golf with my father. So what do you want to do? Mark asked. I want to close the trap, I said. I want to wait until they are so deep in the lie that they can't climb out. I want them to sign more papers. I want them to spend more money. I want the paper trail to be so long and so undeniable that no amount of crying or misunderstanding can explain it away. I leaned forward, and I want to dispute it all at the exact moment it hurts them the most. That is risky, Mark warned. "Your credit score will tank in the meantime." "Let it tank," I said. "I am not buying a house in the suburbs. I am building a business." I went back to the workshop that night. I didn't go home to Tessa's. I turned on the bright overhead lights of the foundry. The space was empty. It was just me and the smell of sawdust. I had a new commission. It wasn't a repair job. It was a build. A local event planner had found my website. They liked the authentic, reclaimed aesthetic of my work. They needed a statement piece for a high-end event, a custom registration table and a backdrop wall made of reclaimed walnut and brass. I looked at the specs. It was a big job. It would pay enough to cover the legal fees Mark was charging me. I picked up a piece of rough walnut. I ran my hand over the grain. It was chaotic, full of knots and twists. Most carpenters would cut around the knots. I was going to feature them. I thought about my parents. I thought about Brielle. I thought about Edgar. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had successfully edited me out of the family portrait and were now spending the money they saved on retouching. But they forgot one thing about wood. You can paint over it. You can veneer it, but the grain is still there, and if you know where to look, you can always find the truth. I turned on the table saw. The blade whirred to life, a high-pitched scream that sounded like music. I wasn't just building a table. I was building a witness stand. I worked until 3 a.m. I cut the wood with precision. I sanded until my arms burned, and as I worked, I formulated the plan. They wanted a party fine. I would help them throw it. I would let them use the credit cards. I would let them book the venue. I would let them invite the senator and the local elite. I would let them stand on the stage and smile. And then, I would pull the floor out from under them, not with a scream, but with a signature. I looked at the branding iron sitting on the workbench. The little wren. I picked it up. "Fly," I whispered. I had work to do. And for the first time in my life. I wasn't working for their approval. I was working for their reckoning. The email arrived at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, blinking onto the screen of my laptop amidst a cloud of sawdust. The subject line was generic enough, urgent inquiry, custom event, backdrop, and signature table. August Gala. I wiped my hands on my apron, leaving faint streaks of walnut dust on the denim, and clicked it open. It was from a company called Sterling & Stone, a high-end event planning firm based in Columbus. They were looking for a rustic modern centerpiece for a VIP reception area. They wanted authenticity. They wanted reclaimed soul. They had seen the Wren and Hollow portfolio online, specifically the nightstand I had resurrected from the trash, and they thought my aesthetic was perfect. I almost deleted it. I was busy. I had 3 chair repairs and a custom bookshelf in the queue. But then I opened the attached PDF brief to see the dimensions. The header of the document made the air leave the room. Client, the Fairmere and Oakmere Community Gala, date August 15th, location Larkview Convention Hall, Ohio. I sat very still. The hum of the air filtration system in the workshop seemed to fade into a high-pitched whine in my ears. Fairmere and Oakmere, my parents' last name, and my husband's last name. They had combined them. They had turned our family names into a brand, and not just a brand, but a charitable front. I scrolled down, my finger trembling slightly on the trackpad. I needed to see the organizational chart. These documents always had a contact list for the vendors. There it was, on page 3. Event host Mr. and Mrs. Oakmere, sponsor representative and media liaison Edgar Fairmere. I leaned back in my shop stool, staring at the ceiling of the warehouse. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, but it was dry and jagged. Edgar wasn't just helping out. He was the media liaison. He was the face of the event. He was the one shaking hands, giving quotes to the local paper, and smiling for the cameras. He was building his entire social standing on the foundation of a marriage to a woman he hadn't bothered to look for in 3 months. They were throwing a party to celebrate themselves, and they were using a trendy event planner to make it look sophisticated. And that planner, in a twist of cosmic irony so sharp it could cut glass, had found me. They didn't know. Sterling and Stone had no idea that Wren and Hollow was the trade name of the missing daughter. To them, I was just a talented artisan in Pennsylvania with a moody Instagram feed. I looked at the budget line, custom walnut backdrop, and table $8,000. $8,000. I closed my eyes and did the mental math. Mark, my forensic accountant, had told me just yesterday that the unauthorized charges on my credit cards had spiked again. They had just put a deposit down on catering. They were going to pay me $8,000 to build their stage, and the money they would use to pay me was likely coming from the credit line they had stolen from me. It was a closed loop of betrayal. I could have said no. I could have replied and said I was booked. I could have sent a screaming email to the event planner telling them that their client was a fraud. But I looked at the branding iron on my workbench. The little wren. This wasn't a job. This was an invitation. This was the universe handing me a key to the front door of the very room where they felt safest. I hit reply. "Dear Sterling and Stone team," I typed, my fingers moving with the precision of a pianist. "Thank you for reaching out. Wren and Hollow would be honored to craft these pieces for your client. We specialize in giving new life to things that have been discarded. I believe our aesthetic aligns perfectly with the narrative of this event. Please find my formal quote attached. I will require a 50% deposit to begin material sourcing." I signed it simply, J. Oak, Lead Artisan. It was close enough to the truth to be legal, but vague enough to be ignored. People see what they want to see. They would see a hipster woodworker name, not a truncated surname. The reply came back in 20 minutes. "Approved. Please send the invoice. We need this delivered by the morning of the 15th. The deposit hit my business account the next day. $4,000. I went to the lumber yard. I didn't buy the cheap stuff. I walked past the pine and the oak. I went to the back, where they kept the black walnut. I selected 3 massive slabs. The wood was dark, heavy, and complex. It had a grain that looked like storm clouds. "Expensive taste," the yard manager said as he helped me load it into the rental truck. "It is for a very special occasion," I said. "A funeral, of sorts?" He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. Back at the workshop, I worked like a woman possessed. I didn't listen to music. I didn't take breaks. I worked in the silence, listening to the bite of the saw and the rasp of the sandpaper. I built the backdrop first. It was 7 feet tall, a panel of seamless walnut slats that looked solid from a distance but allowed light to filter through the gaps. It was imposing. It was elegant. Then, I built the table. This was the centerpiece. This was where guests would sign the guest book. This was where Edgar would lean his elbows while he charmed the donors. I designed it with sharp, clean lines, no curves, no softness. It was a severe piece of furniture. I sanded it until it felt like satin. I oiled it until it glowed with a deep, dark luster. But the most important part of the table wasn't the surface. It was what lay beneath it. On the underside of the table, just behind the front apron where the legs joined the top, I routed out a small, shallow cavity. It was invisible unless you were lying on the floor looking up. I built a small drawer for this cavity, not a standard drawer with a handle. A friction-fit block of wood that matched the grain perfectly. You had to press on a specific knot in the wood to pop it open. It was a trick I had learned from an old cabinetmaker's journal, a priest's hole for furniture. I tested the mechanism. Click, the block slid out. Click, it vanished back into the frame. Perfect. While the oil was drying, I made my second move. I had been nurturing a contact at a regional lifestyle blog called the Rust Belt Renaissance. They featured small businesses, artisans, and people reinventing themselves. I sent the editor a pitch. Title: The Art of Being Erased and Rebuilding from Scratch. I offered them an exclusive interview with the founder of Wren and Hollow. I told them I wouldn't show my face, but I would tell the story of why I started the company. They ate it up. The interview happened over the phone 2 days later. "So, what drives your work?" the reporter asked. "There is a lot of emotion in your product descriptions." "My work is about value," I said into the phone, watching the dust motes dance in the light of the workshop. It is about the fact that you can be part of a house, a family, a chair for 30 years, and the moment you stop being useful, you are discarded. I take things that people threw away because they were too much work or damaged, and I prove that they are actually the most valuable things in the room. Is that a metaphor? The reporter asked. It is a biography, I said. I asked them to hold the piece until the week of August 15th. To coincide with my biggest installation yet. I told them. They agreed. It was good synergy. By the week of the gala, the table was finished. It was magnificent. It was a dark monolith of judgment. I prepared the payload. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't write a tear-stained letter. I sat down at my laptop and printed out 3 documents. Document 1. A copy of the credit report showing the fraudulent loans taken out in Edgar's name and my parents' names using my identity. Document 2. A transcript of the kitchen conversation, typed out from memory, verbatim. Sometimes I wish we had stopped at 1. Document 3. A simple note on wren and hollow letterhead. To the Fairmere and Oakmere families. You wished for a life without me. I granted it. But you didn't just want my absence. You wanted my credit score. You wanted to renovate your house with my ghost. Today, you are celebrating your generosity on a stage built by the daughter you erased, paid for with the money you stole from her. Enjoy the applause. The invoice for the rest of your life is attached. I folded the papers. I sealed them in a thick, cream-colored envelope. On the front of the envelope, I wrote in calligraphy, "Open after the last toast." I slid the envelope into the secret compartment under the table. I pressed the knot. Click. The drawer vanished. The table looked solid. It looked innocent. I stepped back and wiped a smudge of oil from the corner. My phone buzzed. It was an automated email from the event planner. Reminder delivery scheduled for 8:00 a.m., August 15th. Please ensure the team enters through the loading dock. The client will be on site for a final walkthrough at 9 a.m. The client, Edgar, my parents, they would be there. I felt a surge of adrenaline that made my hands shake. I clenched them into fists until the shaking stopped. I wasn't going to send a delivery driver. I wasn't going to hire a courier. I was going to drive the truck myself. I had ordered a company uniform, a black polo shirt with the wren and hollow logo embroidered on the chest, and a black cap pulled low. I had new work boots. I looked like a generic delivery person. I looked like the help, and that was exactly what they saw when they looked at me. Wasn't it, even when I was their daughter? I was just staff. I was the cook. I was the cleaner. Now, I was the executioner. I walked over to the branding iron one last time. I heated it up. I turned the table over, on the underside, right next to the hidden trigger for the compartment. I pressed the iron into the wood. The smell of burning walnut filled the air. Sharp, distinctive, the little wren was branded into the wood forever. I ran my thumb over the charred indentation. See you soon. Edgar, I whispered to the empty room. I turned off the lights in the workshop. The table stood there in the dark, a Trojan horse made of American walnut, waiting to be wheeled into the center of their castle. The service entrance of the Larkview Convention Hall smelled of diesel fumes, wet concrete, and the nervous sweat of 100 caterers trying to plate 3,000 shrimp before the doors opened. I pulled the rental truck up to the loading dock at exactly 7:45 in the evening. The gala was set to start at 8. I was cutting it close, but that was part of the design. I needed the room to be full of tension. I needed the family to be in position. I killed the engine. The vibration of the truck died away, leaving a ringing silence in the cab. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was not Jasira Oakmere, the disappointed daughter. I was not Jasira Fairmere, the invisible wife. I was wearing a black polo shirt with the small white wren logo embroidered over my heart. My hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun under a black cap. I wore steel-toed boots and black cargo pants. I looked like a shadow. I looked like functionality. I stepped out of the truck. The air was cool. But inside the hall, I knew it would be stifling with the heat of spotlights and expectations. Delivery for the Fairmere Oakmere Gala, I called out to the dockmaster, holding up my clipboard. "You are cutting it fine, lady," he grunted, checking his watch. "They are doing the final mic check. You have 10 minutes to get that backdrop up before they open the main doors." 10 minutes is all I need, I said. I unlocked the back of the truck. The ramp slid down with a metallic clang that sounded like a gunshot. I didn't have a crew. I didn't need one. I had brought my own dolly, a heavy-duty model designed for moving pianos. I strapped the walnut signature table to it first. It was heavy solid wood, hiding a secret drawer and a stack of damning evidence, but I moved it with the ease of someone who had built it from scratch. I pushed the dolly through the double rubber doors and into the service corridor. The noise hit me first, the clatter of silverware, the shouting of chefs, the tuning of a violin in the distance. I navigated through the chaos. Head down, cap low. I was a shark swimming through a school of colorful, panicked fish. I burst through the final set of doors into the grand ballroom. The room was breathtaking. I had to give them that. My mother had outdone herself. The ceiling was draped in white silk and crystals. The tables were set with silver that caught the light of 1,000 candles. And there, right in the center of the pre-function area, was the empty space waiting for my delivery. A woman with a headset and a clipboard, the coordinator from Sterling and Stone, spotted me. She was frantic. "Finally!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the ambient murmur of the room. "Wren & Hollow is here. Clear a path. The signature piece is arriving." "Wren & Hollow is here." The name echoed off the high ceilings. I didn't look up. I pushed the dolly forward, the rubber wheels silent on the plush carpet. I maneuvered the table into position, right under the main chandelier. I engaged the wheel locks. Click, click. Then, I went back for the backdrop. By the time I returned with the 7-foot walnut panels, the room had shifted, the air had changed. The frantic energy of the setup crew had been replaced by the hushed, polite murmurs of the early arrivals. I set the backdrop up behind the table. It locked together with a satisfying snap. The dark walnut drank in the light, standing in stark, beautiful contrast to the white silk around it. It looked ancient. It looked permanent. I stood up, brushed a speck of dust from the surface, and finally, I lifted my head. The first person I saw was Brielle. She was standing 10 feet away, holding a flute of champagne that she hadn't taken a sip of yet. She looked radiant in a blue silk gown that cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She was smiling at a donor, nodding politely, but her eyes had drifted over to the workman setting up the display. She looked at me. She saw the black cap. She saw the work boots. She saw the hands that were rough and strong. And then, she saw my eyes. The smile didn't fall off her face. It dissolved. It was like watching a video buffer and then crash. She blinked. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to reassemble a puzzle that had been scattered on the floor. "Jasira," she mouthed. No sound came out. It was just a shape on her lips. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just nodded, a sharp, professional dip of the chin. "Hello, sister." The movement caught the eye of the couple standing next to her. My parents. My father was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. My mother was in silver, looking every inch the matriarch of the year. They were laughing at something the donor had said, their heads thrown back in that practiced, easy way. Then my mother followed Brielle's gaze. She stopped laughing. Her hand went to her throat, clutching the pearl necklace as if it had suddenly tightened. Her eyes widened, not with joy, but with a visceral, instinctive panic. It was the look of someone who had buried a body in the backyard and just watched a dog start digging in the flower bed. My father turned. He saw me. He went pale. His mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut. He looked around quickly to see if anyone else had noticed the resemblance between the help and the host. But the pièce de résistance was Edgar. He emerged from behind the stage curtains, holding a microphone in one hand and a stack of cue cards in the other. He looked confident. He looked like he belonged there. He looked like he had successfully renovated his life. He saw the table first. He stopped to admire it. He ran a hand along the smooth edge of the walnut. He was touching the very object that contained his destruction. Then he looked up at the person who had delivered it. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a special effect. He dropped the cue cards. They scattered on the floor. A messy white fan against the dark carpet. "Jess," he choked out. He took a step forward. Then another. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who was seeing a ghost. But worse, he was seeing a ghost that had come to collect a debt. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice low, urgent. He closed the distance between us, reaching out as if to grab my arm and drag me behind the heavy velvet curtains. "Where have you been?" "My God. Jess, you can't be here. You look like a janitor." I stepped back, smoothly, deliberately. I put the heavy walnut table between us. "Good evening, Mr. Fairmere," I said. My voice was clear, calm, and loud enough to be heard by the coordinator standing nearby. "I am just the vendor. I am here to deliver the commission for Sterling and Stone." "Vendor," Edgar whispered, his eyes darting around the room. "What are you talking about? Stop this. Come with me. We need to talk. Now." He reached for me again, his hand crossing the invisible line of the table. I didn't flinch. I looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. "I wouldn't touch the merchandise if I were you, sir," I said. "The oil is still fresh. You wouldn't want to leave fingerprints." The double meaning hit him. He froze. He looked at his own hand, then at me. He saw something in my eyes he had never seen before. He didn't see the wife who begged for affection. He saw the creditor. "Jasira," my mother hissed, appearing at Edgar's elbow. She was smiling a tight rictus smile for the benefit of the room, but her eyes were venomous. "This is not the time. Go out the back. We will discuss this later." "There is nothing to discuss. Mrs. Oakmere," I said, pulling a clipboard from my belt. "I just need a signature for the delivery. Standard procedure. Once the invoice is signed, I am gone." I held the clipboard out to Edgar. The paper rattled slightly in the air conditioning, but my hand was rock steady. "Sign here," I said, acknowledging receipt of goods in perfect condition. Edgar stared at the pen I was offering. He looked trapped. If he made a scene, he ruined the gala. If he signed, he acknowledged me as a stranger. He took the pen. His hand was shaking. He scrawled his name on the line, Edgar Fairmere. "Thank you," I said. I took the clipboard back. "Enjoy the evening. It looks like it is going to be memorable." I turned to the coordinator, who was watching the exchange with a confused frown. "All set," I told her. "The invoice is with the agency. The piece is yours." "Wait," the coordinator said, looking past me at the backdrop. "That carving, I didn't see that in the proof." I turned back. The guests had started to gather around the display. A small crowd had formed. They weren't looking at my parents. They weren't looking at Edgar. They were looking at the walnut backdrop. I had carved a quote into the wood. It wasn't painted. It was routed deep into the grain. So the shadow created the letters. It required the light to hit it at just the right angle to be legible. And under the chandelier, it was screaming. "The trunk may be cut, but the roots remember the rain. Existence is not a permission. It is a fact. It was art. It was beautiful." And to anyone who didn't know the story, it was just a profound, slightly melancholic statement about nature and resilience. "Oh, that is stunning," a woman in a red dress said, raising her phone to take a picture. "It is so raw. Existence is not a permission. I love that." "It fits the charity theme perfectly," another guest said. "Helping the invisible be seen." My father stood there, staring at the words. He read them. He understood them. He looked like he had swallowed a stone. Brielle covered her mouth with her hand. She knew. She knew exactly what it meant. "It is an artistic choice," I said to the coordinator, my voice carrying over the crowd. We felt the piece needed a voice. I looked at Edgar one last time. He was staring at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. He was leaning right over the secret compartment, right over the letter. "Goodbye," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked away. I walked past Brielle, who stepped back as if I were contagious. I walked past my parents, who were now frozen in a tableau of terror. Unable to scream because they were in public. Unable to smile because they were in hell. I walked through the double doors, back into the service corridor. The noise of the kitchen engulfed me again. The smell of shrimp and steak replaced the smell of expensive perfume. I walked down the loading dock ramp to my rental truck. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic, triumphant rhythm. I had done it. I had walked into the lion's den, slapped the lion in the face, and walked out before it could close its jaws. I climbed into the truck. I started the engine. I checked the time. 8:15. The speeches would start in 45 minutes. The toasts would be at 9:30. At 9:45, the table would be opened. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the Larkview Convention Hall. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the explosion. I knew exactly how much powder I had packed into the keg. As I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the Pennsylvania border, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Edgar. Please come back. We can fix this. I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to wipe tears from my eyes. Fix it, I said to the empty cab. Edgar, darling, I just fixed it. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The night was young, and the best part was, I wasn't the one who had to pay the bill for it. I was crossing the state line back into Pennsylvania when the first shockwave hit. It was not a sound. It was a vibration. My phone, sitting on the passenger seat of the rental truck, began to buzz. It buzzed once, a short, polite notification, then again, then a third time, and then it began to convulse, a continuous, frantic rattling against the vinyl seat that sounded like a trapped insect fighting for its life. I did not pick it up. I kept my hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the stretch of dark highway illuminated by my headlights. I knew exactly what was happening. It was 9:45 in the evening. The toasts were over. The champagne had been drunk, and back in the Larkview Convention Hall, the Trojan horse had been opened. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could see it with crystal clarity in my mind, like a scene from a movie I had directed. I imagined the moment, the applause dying down. Edgar, flushed with the success of his speech, perhaps leaning against the table, his hand brushing against the hidden knot I had sanded so smooth. Or perhaps it was a guest, let us call her Mrs. Gable, the town gossip who always needed to touch everything who noticed the seam, or maybe the coordinator. Tidying up the guest book, saw the edge of the envelope. However it happened, the envelope was open. The phone stopped buzzing for a second, then started ringing. The screen lit up the cab. Edgar, I let it ring. It rang until it went to voicemail. Then it started again immediately. I pulled into a rest stop 10 miles outside of Canton Harbor. I needed to be stationary for this. I parked the truck between two semi-trailers, turned off the engine, and picked up the phone. I didn't answer. I waited for the voicemail notification. It appeared a minute later. I pressed play, putting the phone on speaker. Edgar's voice filled the dark cab. He sounded breathless, high-pitched, stripping away all the polished baritone he used for public speaking. Just pick up. You have to pick up right now. What did you do? My God. Mrs. Albright found the letter. She thought it was a thank you note from the charity. She read the first part out loud before your father grabbed it. People are asking questions. They are asking who you are, Jess. They are asking about the stolen credit. You need to call me and tell me this is a sick joke. Right now. I listened to the message twice. Mrs. Albright. That was better than I had planned. Mrs. Albright was the head of the library board. She had a voice that carried to the back row of a cathedral, and she lacked the social filter to stop reading once she started. I could imagine the silence that must have fallen over the ballroom, the clinking of silverware stopping, the smile freezing on my mother's face. Who is Jasira? That was the question spreading through the room like smoke. For 3 years, they had successfully implied that they only had one daughter, the perfect Brielle. Or if they mentioned me, I was the troubled one, the one finding herself far away. They had never mentioned a daughter who listened to them wish her away in a kitchen. They certainly never mentioned a daughter whose identity was currently funding the floral arrangements on the tables. I didn't call Edgar back. I sent him a text. I am the vendor. I delivered the product. The invoice is in the envelope. Pay it. A moment later, the texts from my parents started arriving. My father's was first. It was short, brutal, and completely devoid of self-reflection. You are destroying this family. If you think this stunt will get you what you want, you are insane. We are calling the police. I laughed. The sound was sharp in the quiet truck. Calling the police to report that their daughter had left a letter at a party that she had told the truth. My mother's text followed. It was longer, more manipulative. It was the soft approach, the velvet glove over the iron fist. Jaceera, honey, clearly you are having a breakdown. We are so worried. Please come to the house tomorrow. Just us. We can talk about whatever you think you heard, whatever you think we did. We can fix the accounts. Just don't talk to anyone else. Please, for Brielle's sake. Whatever you think you heard, whatever you think we did. Even now, with the evidence staring them in the face, they were gaslighting me. They were trying to frame my reality as a hallucination. I didn't reply to them. I blocked their numbers for the night. I needed silence to savor the victory. But then, a text came through that I hadn't expected. It was from Brielle. I stared at her name on the screen. My thumb hovered. Brielle, the golden child, the one who flowed, the one who never caused problems. I opened the message. I saw the letter. Dad is throwing things in the green room. Mom is crying in the bathroom, telling everyone it is a misunderstanding. But Jess, I need to tell you something. I heard them too, years ago. When you were in college, they said if you didn't come back after graduation, they would change the locks. They said you were expensive noise. I never told you because I was scared they would turn on me. I am sorry. I can't take your side publicly. Jess, I can't lose them. But I am sorry. I read it 3 times. Expensive noise. A tear leaked out of my eye, hot and fast. It wasn't a tear of relief. It was a tear of fury. Brielle had known. My sister. The one I had defended on the playground. The one I had helped with her homework. The one I had stepped back for so she could shine. She had known for years that I was unwanted. And she had said nothing. She had prioritized her own comfort over my reality. I can't take your side publicly. Of course she couldn't. Brielle was a survivor in her own way. She survived by being the reflection of what they wanted. If she cracked the mirror, she would be discarded just like me. I didn't text her back. There was nothing to say. Her apology was valid, but her cowardice was a choice, and I was done accepting partial payments on loyalty. I started the truck and drove the rest of the way to Canton Harbor. By the time I got to my apartment, my real apartment, the studio I had rented with my own money a month ago, it was 2 a.m. I was exhausted, but my mind was racing like a turbine. I opened my laptop. It was time for the second wave. I went to the website of the Rust Belt Renaissance. The editor had promised the article would go live at midnight to coincide with the big reveal. There it was, on the homepage. From ashes to Walnut the artisan who built her own table. The photo was of the nightstand, my first resurrection. The article was beautiful. It didn't name names. It didn't mention the Oakmeres or Briar Hollow explicitly, but it told the story of a woman who was treated like a glitch in her family, who overheard her parents wish her away, and who left to build a life out of reclaimed things. It quoted me, "They built a life on appearances. I build things on truth. Wood doesn't lie. People do." I scrolled down to the comments section. It had been up for 2 hours. Comment by Ohio native 88. Wait, is this about the Oakmere family? I was at a gala tonight in Larkview, and there was a huge scene. Someone found a letter in a table made by a company called Wren and Hollow. The daughter has been missing for months and nobody said a word. Comment by Briar Mom. I know that family. They always act so perfect. I heard the dad screaming in the parking lot tonight about ungrateful children. If this is true, That is a toxic family dynamic if I ever saw one. Comment by Justice Seeker. Wait, did the article imply they stole her credit? That is financial abuse. I hope she sued them. The court of public opinion was in session, and the jury was not sequestered. I closed the laptop. I felt a deep, dark satisfaction. They could delete my name from the guest list. They could throw away my photos, but they couldn't delete the internet. But comments and rumors were soft power. I needed hard power. I needed the kind of power that came with a federal stamp. I opened my email client and found the draft Mark and I had prepared. It was the formal dispute package for the 3 credit bureaus. It contained the affidavits of identity theft. It contained the police report number Mark had filed earlier that day, not against my parents specifically, but against unknown perpetrators residing at 14 Maple Drive. It was a semantic distinction that allowed the investigation to start without me having to personally handcuff my father yet. The package detailed $35,420 in unauthorized charges. It flagged the renovation loan. It flagged the store cards. And it demanded an immediate freeze and investigation. I looked at the send button. Once I clicked this, there was no going back. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a machine. The banks would trigger their fraud departments. The credit bureaus would send notification letters, and those letters wouldn't go to Edgar's email. They would go via certified mail to the address on file, my parents' house. They would receive official, scary-looking envelopes from federal-level institutions, demanding explanations for why a person who supposedly didn't exist was spending thousands of dollars from their IP address. My mother could charm a neighbor. She could charm a pastor. She could not charm a fraud algorithm. I thought about the text from my father. "You are destroying this family." No, Dad, I am not destroying it. I am just conducting an audit. I clicked send. The screen refreshed. Message sent. I sat back in my chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me feeling hollowed out but strangely solid, like the wood I worked with. I checked my bank account, the real one. I had $8,000 in it, including the deposit for the table. I had rent paid for 2 months. I had commissions lined up. I was poor by Briar Hollow standards. I was struggling, but I was free. I picked up my phone one last time before bed. There were 12 more missed calls from Edgar. 3 from my mother. I tapped the screen and typed a new status update on the Wren and Hollow business page. Project Gala delivered successfully. Sometimes the most important restoration project isn't a piece of furniture. It is yourself. I posted it. Then I turned off the phone, crawled into my bed, and for the first time in 3 months, I didn't just sleep, I rested. The next morning, the sun rose over Canton Harbor, turning the brick buildings to gold, 300 miles away, in Briar Hollow. I knew the sun was rising on a very different scene. I imagined my parents sitting at their kitchen table, the same table where they had laughed about me staring at a pile of newspapers and a ringing phone they were too afraid to answer. They had wanted a life without me. Now, they were going to find out exactly how expensive my absence really was. But I wasn't done. The table was just the opening statement. The credit dispute was the evidence. Now, it was time for the closing argument, and I knew exactly where it had to happen. Mark called me at 10 in the morning. "Jess," he said, his voice crisp. "The dispute is logged. The letters go out today. They will get them by Friday." "Good," I said. "And Jess?" Mark paused. "Edgar's lawyer called my office. He wants a sit-down. He says they want to settle this amicably before criminal charges are filed." "A settlement?" I asked, sharpening a chisel. "They are offering to pay off the cards," Mark said, "and they are offering you a stipend to sign a non-disclosure agreement. They want to buy your silence. Jess, they are terrified." I looked at the chisel. It was sharp enough to shave with. "Tell them I will meet," I said. "But not at their house, and not at a lawyer's office." "Where then?" "There is a coffee shop in Cedar and Slate," I said. "Neutral ground. Public. I want them to have to look me in the eye while people are watching." "And the NDA?" Mark asked. "Tell them to bring it," I said. I need some scrap paper for my sketches. Mark laughed. I will set it up. I hung up. The final act was approaching. They thought they could buy me off. They thought money was the only currency that mattered. They still didn't understand. I didn't want their money. I wanted their signature. I wanted a confession written in ink, not whispered in a kitchen. I went back to work. I had a bookshelf to finish. And after that, I had a life to build. The coffee shop, cedar and slate, was chosen for its acoustics. It was the kind of place with high tin ceilings, exposed brick, and an ambient noise level of grinding beans and indie folk music that created a privacy screen for every table. It was neutral ground. It was public enough to prevent a scene, but loud enough to mask a confession. I arrived 10 minutes early. This was a tactical choice. I wanted to choose the table. I picked one in the back corner, with a clear view of the entrance but far enough from the counter that the baristas would not hear the details of the destruction I was about to unleash. I ordered a black tea, sat down, and placed the thick manila folder Mark had prepared on the table. It sat there like a loaded weapon. They arrived together. My parents walked in first, looking like they were dressed for a funeral or a board meeting stiff, formal, their faces drawn tight with a mixture of fear and indignation. Edgar trailed behind them. He looked terrible. His shirt was untucked on one side, and he had dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. When they saw me, my mother let out a small, performative gasp. Reaching for my father's arm, they approached the table. "Jasira," my mother said, her voice trembling with that weaponized fragility she had perfected over 3 decades. "Oh, thank God. You look thin." "Sit down," I said. I did not stand up. I did not offer a hug. I gestured to the 3 empty chairs opposite me. They sat. The dynamic was immediate and telling. My parents sat close together, shoulder to shoulder, a united front of denial. Edgar sat slightly apart, creating a physical gap between himself and them. He looked at me, then at the folder, then at his hands. "We are glad you agreed to meet," my father began, using his reasonable, patriarchal voice. "This whole situation has spiraled out of control. We need to de-escalate before anyone does something they cannot undo." "The escalation happened when you stole my identity," I said. My voice was low, level, and stripped of all emotion. "It happened when you used my credit score to renovate your house because you assumed I would never come back to check." "Stole is a very harsh word," my mother said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We were managing your affairs. You left. Jasira, you abandoned us. We didn't know if you were ever coming back. We had expenses. The gala it was for the family name. Your name." "My name is on the credit card statement," I said. "But I wasn't on the guest list." I opened the folder. I didn't slide the papers across the table. I laid them out, one by one, like a tarot reading from hell. First, the credit report from the 3 bureaus, highlighting the $35,000 in unauthorized debt. Second, the time-stamped log from the internet service provider, showing the IP address of my father's desktop computer accessing the bank applications. Third, and most damning, the password reset log for my old email account. "January 10th, I said, pointing to the date. "You hacked my recovery email 3 weeks before I left. You were planning this while I was still cooking your dinner. You didn't steal from me because I left. You made me leave so you could steal." Edgar leaned forward. He was staring at the date. "January 10th, he whispered. He looked up at my father. "You told me she gave you permission to use her credit for the renovation loan in March. You said she called you." "She was confused," my father said quickly, waving a hand dismissively. "She was under a lot of stress. We were just trying to streamline things." "I never called," I said to Edgar. "I was living in a warehouse in Pennsylvania, eating soup from a can, while they were using my name to buy Italian marble for the guest bathroom." Edgar looked at my parents. The realization was washing over him, slow and cold. He had believed their narrative that I was the unstable one, the heavy one. But the math didn't lie. The dates didn't lie. "We can pay it back," my father said, his voice tightening. That is why we are here. We will write you a check. We will cover the debt. You just need to withdraw the dispute with the credit bureaus and sign a statement saying it was a familial misunderstanding. We don't need the police involved. Think of Brielle. Think of Edgar's career. It is not about the money, I said. Of course it is about the money, my mother snapped, dropping the fragile act for a split second. It is always about money with you people. You people? I asked. You mean your daughter? You know what I mean, she hissed. You were always so transactional. We fed you, we housed you, and the moment we needed a little flexibility, a little help to maintain our standing, you try to burn the house down. It was just handy, my father muttered. It was a throwaway line, spoken under his breath, but in the quiet corner of cedar and slate, it sounded like a gunshot. What? Edgar asked. My father shrugged, looking annoyed that he had to explain basic logistics. Her credit, it was just sitting there. She has that perfect score because she never buys anything fun. It was just convenient. It was a waste not to use it. Convenient. Edgar's face went the color of ash. He looked at me. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had promised to protect, and then he looked at the people he had been trying to impress for 5 years. Convenient, Edgar repeated. You destroyed her credit. You committed felonies. You erased her from the family because it was convenient. Oh, stop being dramatic, Edgar, my mother said. We were going to pay it off eventually, after the gala donations came in. No, Edgar said. He stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing looks from the nearby tables. No, you told me she abandoned us. You told me she was having a breakdown. You didn't tell me you were treating my wife like a spare wallet you found in the couch cushions. He looked at me. Jess, I didn't know. I swear to God. I didn't know about the January date. I know you didn't, I said. But you didn't ask either. You just believed them because it was easier than believing me. Edgar flinched. He sat back down, but he moved his chair. He moved it to the side of the table. My side. My parents looked at him with pure shock. They had lost their useful idiot. This is ridiculous, my father spat. What do you want, Jasira? You want to see us in handcuffs? Is that it? You want to humiliate us? I want a signature, I said. I pulled the final document from the folder. It was the civil settlement agreement Mark had drafted. It was brutal, airtight, and non-negotiable. This document states 3 things, I said. 1, you admit to the unauthorized use of my credit and agree to immediate repayment of all debts, plus legal fees. 2, you agree to a permanent cease and desist on using my name, image, or likeness for any social or financial purpose. 3, you acknowledge that any violation of this agreement triggers an automatic confession of guilt that can be submitted to the district attorney. I uncapped a heavy black pen and set it on top of the paper. Sign it, and I withdraw the fraud dispute. The debt becomes a private loan you pay back. The police inquiry stops. And if we don't, my mother asked, her voice shrill, then I walk out of here, I said. I leave the dispute active. The federal investigation continues. The banks prosecute. And by next week, the headline in the Briar Hollow Gazette won't be about your gala. It will be about your arraignment for identity theft and wire fraud. My father picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the terms. He looked for a loophole, a wiggle room, a place to negotiate. There was none. Mark was very good at his job. This is blackmail, he whispered. No, I said. This is a receipt. He looked at my mother. They exchanged a look of desperate calculation. They weren't looking at each other with love. They were looking at each other as accomplices realizing the getaway car had a flat tire. If they signed, they lost control over me forever. They admitted I won. If they didn't sign, they went to prison. The choice wasn't moral. It was practical. It was convenient. My father took the pen. He didn't look at me. He pressed the nib to the paper so hard I could see the white of his knuckles. He signed. He slid the paper to my mother. She was crying again. But these were tears of rage. She signed her name with a sharp, angry scrawl. I took the paper back. I checked the signatures. I blew on the ink to dry it. Done, I said. I slid the paper into my folder and closed it. I stood up. Jess, Edgar said. He stood up with me. He looked desperate, like a man trying to catch a leaving train. I'm coming with you. I can't go back to that house. I can't stay with them. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had shared a life with. The man who had let me disappear for 3 months because his in-laws told him to. You can't stay with them, I agreed. But you can't come with me. Why? He asked, his voice cracking. I'm on your side now. You are on my side because you saw the paperwork, I said. You are on my side because you realized you were being played, not because you missed your wife. You need to figure out who you are when you aren't trying to please the Oakmeres, Edgar, and you need to do that alone. But I love you, he whispered. I know, I said. But right now, I love myself more, and I worked too hard to rebuild my foundation to let someone walk on it before the concrete is dry. I turned to my parents. They were staring at the table, defeated, small, and incredibly ordinary. Goodbye, I said. Do not contact me. The payments go through my lawyer. I walked out of Cedar and Slate. The air outside was crisp and clean. The sun was shining on the pavement. I walked to my rental truck, tossed the folder on the passenger seat, and climbed in. I didn't feel euphoric. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. The weight I had been carrying for 34 years, the weight of trying to earn my place in their world, was gone. I picked up my phone. I had one last message to send. I opened the group email thread, the one about the summer plans, the one that had started this entire endgame. I typed one line, I still exist, but from now on, my existence does not require your permission. I hit send, then I deleted the thread. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the highway, toward Canton Harbor, toward Wren and Hollow, and toward a future that I had built with my own 2 hands. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how Jasaira handled her family. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.